Hi everyone, welcome to this workshop on AML Triggers, which is hosted by John McCandless. I'm just going to go through the agenda. In this session, we will cover money laundering report and parameters, including judgment calls, source of funds, and an AML 5 refresh, including EFTs and the freezing of accounts. If you have any questions throughout the workshop, feel free to pop them into the chat bar, and after maybe at the end we'll answer these questions. And also we'll be sending out some detailed user notes on this as well, so you'll have those sent out in the follow-up email alongside the recording of this session. So now I'm going to pass over to John. John, you're on mute, by the way. I muted you, sorry.
Hi everyone, and again, thanks for joining today. I'm just going to share my screen here, so hopefully you can all see that.
Not yet, John.
Share screen. That coming up now?
Yes, I can see it now. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, guys. So this morning we're going to take a look at a few items in relation to AML. So we're going to start off with the source of funds. So source of funds in Scion, it may be something that some of you guys aren't aware of, but it is a feature in Scion for being able to capture the source of funds at the time of lodgement. And there's different things you can do with that. It creates alerts going through to your AML officer. You can, and we'll look at some of the settings in Scion, how to switch it on. It's fairly easy to switch on. The software is there, so we'll look at the settings on how to switch it on, and some of the parameters around it for being able to capture, for setting the amount for it to prompt on the screen. So you guys can all see my screen there. So you'll notice there I'm in the counter program, and what I've done is I have just made a lodgement into an account. And I've lodged it in for €300. So that's the lodgements on this machine's limit is set quite low. And once I've lodged that money in, you'll notice now on the screen, it's prompting me for, do I want to capture the source of funds from the member? So at this stage, then this would pop up and the teller would then select either yes or no to this pop-up box. So if it's coming up, it's met the requirement of the limit that's been set by the credit union to capture the source of funds. So I'm just going to go on ahead and click on yes, and it'll tell me that the transaction's been saved, and it'll now begin to take me into the workflow. So this screen in Scion, so most of you probably haven't seen this screen. So this is the source of funds transaction screen. So you'll see here from my drop-down list, I can ask the member where that source is coming from. So so you can select dividends, business profits, pension, rent, salary. You can ask at that stage then and select from the drop-down list. I'm also going to show you how you can add your own sources into that. So these are just preset ones by Wellington.
John, can I just interrupt for 1 minute? There's a couple of people having issues with sound. Can I just check if everyone can if you can pop into the chat? Can everyone hear John okay? Okay, the sound seems to be okay. There's a couple of people having difficulties. Guys, if you could maybe leave and rejoin, I'll admit you back in. Sorry about that, John, if you want to continue.
Okay. Okay, can you all still see my screen there okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So again, you can decide here what you want, what you want to select. So we'll put down, I'm just going to put in here other, and I'll select sale of house. So once I've selected that, then I can select on the print document, which will print me out the AML form. And just click on the OK button there. And print my form out. So that's that source of funds captured for that member. Okay, so I just want to show you how that looks then on that member's account. Whenever those source of funds have been captured. Just out of curiosity, is there many credit unions that are using the capturing the source of funds currently? If you just pop it in the chat there if you are. I just want to get an idea of if anyone's using it. Okay. So if I take a look now, there's that transaction that I'd put through for 300 euro. So if I take a look at that transaction, I can go in and under the other details tab here, I can see that my source of funds have been recorded. So it's telling me that source of funds, so my notes that I've typed in will come through, and my reason that I've selected, which is OT for other, will show up on the screen. So that'll be attached to the transaction. So it will. So you'll always be able to go back on that and see. So you will. So once you've done that, then there's two that will create an alert on the member's account for your AML officer. So if we take a look in the program, MLAL, and we can see here now that this is creating an alert into the money laundering alerts program, which is where the AML officer then would be going in to review. If you are using this way, some credit unions might still print the form out and be left in with the money laundering officer, but this puts it all through on the system, and you can go in then to this program called money laundering alerts, and you can see then any alerts that are on that account. So you can do it by date range, you can do it by account, you can do it by alert type, how it was generated, and you can update it in here. So your AML officer will be able to go in and they could double click on the alert and it will take them into the transaction. And then from in the transaction, you can see that the proceeds, sorry, I put the comments that I put in and the and the reason will show up, so it's easy for your AML officer to be able to review it. And then once it's reviewed, your AML officer can then update to say they've examined it or they've reported it or they've completed it. That they're happy with the transaction. So that's when you do the transaction in the counter program. So what you can also do is, rather than your AML officer having to go in and check the screen, maybe once or twice a week, you can get the system to generate a task, and then that task then you can assign to your AML officer. So every time that an alert is created for AML, they'll get a task into the system tasks in Scion. So just down here into the main screen. So I'll just see if I can show you one. Sorry, a bit slow this morning. I have none set up to show in there, but I'm just going to show you how you can set the task up so you're able to go back over this and set it up for yourself. So there'll be two screens that you need to take note of to set the task up. So the first one is AATY main, so it's access types. And if you just filter in the top here for I think it's money. Yeah, and you should see two in here. You see AML and MOLA. So the one you're looking for is this MOLA transact access type, and you'll see over here you've got all your task types that are set up. So what you need to do is look through your task types, and you should see an anti-money laundering task type, and you just need to assign that to your access type for anti-money laundering or money laundering, that first one there, the one I've highlighted, and click on accept. If you don't want to set the task up, what you can do is you can set up a system message. So you can set up a new system message in SMTY main and link it then back in here. So rather than the member of staff getting a task to alert them that a money laundering alert has been created, you can go in and you can assign a message to it rather than a task. So I'm just going to set this up with a task here. Save my task. And guys, this video will be shared afterwards, so if you're looking to set this up, you can refer back to the video. So I've set up my task there. I've linked my access type to my task. And now the last step I need to do is go into the program task type maintenance and look for my task. So, and you'll see then your AML task on our dev machine. We've just got two different types of tasks, but you'll see your task in there, and you just assign then your role code for your money laundering officer, or you assign your AML officer's operator in here. If you don't want the task going to, so that's, for example, if your AML officer has the same role code as, say, the manager, but you don't want the manager to be getting these tasks all the time, you would leave your role code blank, and you would just put then your AML officer's name in here by searching by their operator code. And then once you've got that set up, then put something in there. Once you've got that set up, anytime that workflow is triggered in Counter Program, if that transaction qualifies for source of funds capture, it will then generate that task for your AML officer then to go in and check the money laundering alert screen and review the transaction and see any notes that the teller has put on. So the setting that defines what amount is used to trigger that workflow is held in ConMain. So each credit union might this will be different in each credit union depending on what your own your AML policy is. But if you go into ConMain and if you type in into the description box here, so if you type in the words Laund, it'll search for you. So you'll see in here you've got two settings that you want to look at here. You've got your money laundering form limit check, and then your money laundering form for withdrawal. So you'll see the first one there that I've highlighted is for the lodgements, and then this one down here is for withdrawals. So some credit unions don't capture the source of funds for withdrawals. They might want to. So what I would suggest is if you didn't want to capture the source of funds for money out of the credit union, is to just set that to a very high number. So for example, and then it would never capture the source of funds for withdrawals. And then have your lodgement one, so money laundering form limit check, and have that set to whatever your credit union will have. So you can set that to whatever you need. And then you've got this setting up here, which is your for cash only. So you can decide whether you want this to include checks, or whether it's just cash coming in. So again, it's just a flag for yes or no. So cash only amounts, no. So that would include then checks and cash coming into the credit union. So we've just set that up, and I'm just going to just want to confirm tasks here. Okay. So we just going through the transaction again. So just to capture that source of funds, I'm going to go for rent and agreement. So yeah, so that's just that's how you capture up your. We have a lot of tasks in there, so I'll probably not see the one I'm looking for. But that's how you capture your source of funds in the counter program. So I also mentioned too that there was that drop down list where you can add in additional items. So it's held under RETY main. So if you go into the program RETY main, I'll just go through that one more time. So RETY main, and if you just do an F12 lookup and you just search in here for so part of the word source, and you'll see there then funds source, and you'll see then these are all the items that are in the drop down list. Whenever we clicked on the drop down list, so you can add your own comments or your own details in here. So you can also put notes onto this. So you'll see here, if you were to add a new one, you could go in and put comments in that would come up on the source of funds form. So that could be triggers for, your for your tellers, so you could put let's say pension, you could if it's a lump sum from a pension, you could put a comment in there to say that the teller must capture what company it's coming from or anything like that, or the employer. So just you can put your own comments in against, and they pop up on the screen whenever you're recording, whenever the source of funds transaction prompt comes up and you select your drop down. You will have seen before that the comments came up there for other. So something along the lines of this, and you can have that popping up on the screen. So next then, just to show you how to switch on the source of funds. So there's two programs that you'll need to check and make two entries then to switch on the source of funds. The first one is called workflow maintenance, because source of funds is triggered by a workflow. So you'll need to check that your workflow maintenance is switched on for your source of funds. So before you do that, it's always best to check that you have access to that program. So again, you can just quickly check in program maintenance and just make sure you have access to OPR main. So you'll be able to see straight away if you go in and check and go down to your role permissions, you'll see if your role has permission. So the first program is WOPR main. If I now go into WOPR main, scroll down your workflow codes at the top, you should see one called SO funds. So all the details will already be in there. So they will. They went down as part of an update, so your conditions and all that. So you don't need to change anything here. The only thing that you'll need to do is make sure that this active button here is ticked. and the ask run. So just make sure these two tick boxes are ticked. And once you've done that, that's everything you need to do on that screen. So again, just go into WOPR main, scroll down your work flow process codes at the top, and select then the one that you want to your source of funds, and then you can switch that on by making sure that it's active and the ask run is ticked. So once you've done that, then the second step to turn that on is to put that into the program. So the program that's going to call that is going to be the counter program. So again, we just go into PRG main, and under amend mode, we go into the counter program. And in the counter program, you may be familiar with this option, but you'll see this tab called workflows. So if you scroll down, you'll need to create 2 entries in here. So you'll need to create an entry with a start date. So it could be a date in the past, and the run sequence number would be number 1. And then if you just scroll over to or go over to your process code, you don't have to type it in. You can just do an F12 here, and if you look then, and you'll see your source of funds workflow. So that's pulling from the screen that we previously just looked at. And then your program stage, again, if you just do an F12 on that and you select post commit, so POSCOM, and then you do that for create mode. So the drop down list would be in create mode. And again, you just make a second entry in there, and this time for run sequence number 2. Same again, source of funds, post commit, and only this time mode would be in amend. So you have to have those 2 entries in there. And what that then will trigger the workflow for any time that a transaction qualifies for your is over the limit that you've set in Commune, which we looked at previously. Whenever you go into whenever you set these up, it'll trigger the source of funds. So it will for both withdrawals and lodgements. And again, if you wanted to not trigger it for withdrawals, you would then set that Commune setting to something that's very high that it would never trigger them for it. So yeah, that's the source of funds. Hopefully you find that useful, and it's something that you guys will be able to implement in your credit union. And again, it's creating that trigger. So it is, it's taking that manual process out of the tellers having to manually, fill the form out and give it to the AML officer. Sorry, just let me close my emails down there. It's taken that that manual process away, and it's keeping a record then of them in your money laundering alert screen, where you can then go in and action, do some actions on those transactions and complete them or mark them as if they're reported. And then again, you can always go back onto that screen and you can look at ones for accounts to see what ones have been reported or what ones have been completed or what ones have been marked as suspicious. So that's on the source of funds. So if everyone's okay with that, then I'm going to move on then to the money laundering report in Scion. Okay. So your money laundering report in Scion basically is a report that can list members out and kind of put them into different categories. So different risk codes, sorry. So when we say this report is, if you want to use this as an automated process, which some credit unions already do, this report will look at your look at certain selection criteria that you have set up in Scion, and it will move your risk codes. So if a member has a low risk code, it'll move them on to can move them into a medium risk code depending on what criteria you tell the system. So I'm just going to go through some parameters here on the report before I get into the automated updating of risk codes. Um, so let me see. So by standard though, you've got your account number. So you've got your you can run this for a certain account range. You know, for example, if you maybe for a credit union that has had an income and TOE, they might want to reassess all the risk codes on the system. And generate them to what their criteria is. So you can run it for different account ranges, or you can run it for just put one and then your last account number in or 99999, and it'll cover all. It'll cover all members. So the first parameter you've got there is update risk modes. Okay, so that parameter is the important one. That's the one that's going to change your members' risk code. So if you have the criteria set, that's going to change them from high to or from low to medium or medium to high. It's completely up to yourself. What I do find is most credit unions don't set a criteria for defining a member as high risk. That they still manually look after that themselves, but they would have between going from say maybe low to medium low, medium high, and then they would leave high as a manual process for their AML officer to review and decide whether or not they're going to set that member to that risk code. So if that is set to Y, Scion will update the member risk codes based on the risk code criteria when running the money laundering report. So if that flag is set to no, nothing will be updated, but a new proposed risk code will be shown listed beside the current risk code on the report, and then that would be a manual exercise for your money laundering officer then to decide whether or not they're actually going to update those risk codes in account maintenance. So again, you can do it two ways. You can have the system doing it, or you can have you can still set your criteria, and the system won't change the risk code, but it will tell you that it thinks it needs to be changed, and it will give you the option then to change it manually. So include lodgements. If this is set to Y, then that includes the lodgements when determining the proposed risk codes, which are identified in the transactions limit section, which we're going to look at in a bit. And again, for withdrawals, if you want to include withdrawals in it, it will it'll include those withdrawals for you. So there's a new parameter in there which is called recalculate all, and this is to allow for the recalculation of all risk codes for certain selection criteria. And again, the selections are configured in selection maintenance and assigned to the risk codes in money laundering limits. So just some other so that's your parameters there on the system. So just some other parameters to just to alert you to that aren't actually on the report, but you can set in the background. So if you have a look in PRPA main, and we take a look for money laundering, and in here you'll see alert limit to report here. So basically what this setting is every time a money laundering form is printed in Encounter, or a manual money laundering alert through money laundering alert maintenance is added into the account, or if there's a financial sanctions alert generated on the account. So this parameter determines how many alerts the member can have before they will appear on the money laundering report. So you can define that in. So they mightn't have met their criteria. They mightn't have met the criteria to move up to maybe medium risk, or they mightn't have met the transactional limits. But you have created a money laundering alert as marked the account maybe is suspicious, or they've hit a sanction check. So you can decide then, you can set that limit to whatever you want to. It's currently probably defaulted to 2. And then you can also, this one down below, some months to check. So this links back into, so this will check back for up to 6 months to see if the member has hit, had either 2 of those, either transaction and money coming in, a counter alerts created, a manual alert created, or a sanction alert, and it will check back then 6 months, and if it has been, if there has been 2 or more, then it'll pick it up on your report. So they're just settings that you can't look at. You can't see, they're not in the actual report, but you can see them in the background. So the next thing then we'll take a look at is our money laundering limits. Okay, so from my understanding, there's not a lot of credit unions that actually use these limits in here, but you will see here in it. So this is where if you include lodgements and withdrawals in your AML when you're running your money laundering report. So it'll look to this screen. So it will. So what we can see here is you can set your own ones up in here too. But if we look here, we can see that standard risk will move to standard or medium and high. So to move for an account to move to medium, so you'll see the risk code here is medium, and we're going to take a look at risk codes and the severity level 5. So these are the limit details. So monthly, 1,000, and 8 transactions yearly, and 50 transactions, quarterly, 3,500 and 25 transactions, and then half yearly. So you can set your own limits in there. So you can. So what you'll probably find is if your credit union is not using this at the minute, you'll probably find it in there. Those limits are set to very high, to something like maybe 99999. Because I know that from talking to some credit unions that they don't set those limits, because if they're set too low, it's just going to change the member's risk code. Or if the member does say a member comes in and does a one-off lodgement, for 50,000, but from the sale of a house or something, you're not going to want the system to set that to high risk if that's what you have set up in here. So again, it's up to each credit union whether or not they decide to use these limits. But if you're going to start running the money laundering report and updating the risk codes, you need to check the screen to see what your limits are set at. So that's your money laundering limits in there. So we'll just take a look now at our actual money laundering risk codes. So these are your money laundering risk codes in Scion. Okay. So you'll see here we have 3 set up. So we've got low, medium, and high. Okay. And over here you'll see a low risk code. So you would need to define your selections on what you want, what you define as a low risk code. So you probably want, whenever you open the account, you're probably always going to set that member to a low risk code. So your selection for your risk code. So I'm just going to open up another session here. So I've got 2 screens. So your selections are defined in cell main and in selection maintenance. Now I know that the selection program, it can be quite complicated to get to use. And that's where you'd need to then, if a credit union did want to define these selections, that's where you could then reach out and we could do some work on it for you there to get it done. So if you do want to define your selections and you're not able to do it yourself, you probably will need then the assistance of us to do it, you know. So when we talk about work like that, then that would probably be then chargeable to the credit union. So you can just reach out and ask what would be required to set that up for you, if you feel that you're not able to do it yourself. So if we take a look in selection maintenance, so just to show you some examples. So if we take a look at money laundering low risk there. Oh, right. So basically there's two items in this one so the system would always look at the and it would look at the tenant and it would say if it's a juvenile, set it to low risk. Okay, and that's all that's in that selection. There might be other things that you want to, that you might want to define in there. You could start looking at things like if a member works within a certain employment sector, or lives in a certain country, or is from a different country or a different nationality. You could start looking at adding things in, probably not to your low selection, but maybe into your medium selection. So that one's quite simple. That's all you would really need in your low. But you could look then at your medium selection. And again, there's not very much in here, but you could set that if the member is this one just has in it that they're less than they've been a member less than 1 year, and it would set them to medium. So they would be at medium for the whole of their first year of membership. And then you could start looking at adding in things like if the member's account is has a certain status. So say your credit union uses statuses. Maybe if a member, I know some credit unions do this. So if the member has no ID on file, no proof of address on file, and they haven't done customer due diligence, some credit unions change that account status to CDD or no ID, or things like post returned. There's a lot of different credit unions do a lot of different ways where statuses rather than just the normal active, dormant, and closed. So you could look in here about defining it if the member's account status is dormant, or if it's set for no ID, or you could get your selection to look at the member's ID to see if actually, rather than having to rather than it having to you having to change the status of account. You could look at things in here like in the tenants, and you should see one in here for tenant ID expiry. It's in there somewhere, tenant ID expiry, and you could set that to say that is if that yeah, it's in there somewhere. I'm not sure what the system, it's slow, but you could set that, and you could say if that date is greater than the process date or less than the process date, then the system Scion's going to know that member's ID is out of date. So you could then move that. The system would then, if you've set that in that selection, the system that would then move that into the move that to high risk code, or sorry, medium risk code. That's one we're looking at. So yeah, there's all different things. You can some credit unions. One that I've been looking at, if it's a joint account, they set it to medium. If it's a club account, it's set to medium. If it requires, if it meets the criteria for no ID, it goes to medium, and proof of address is out of date. So there's a lot that you can do with the selections. Each credit union will be different, and they'll want to define their own selection criteria. But once your selections are defined, then and set up, if you just say if there is anyone attempting to set up their own selections, Just one thing to note is your program must always be money law, and then we'll do that. Say hi. The reason we have to do that then is if we don't do that, if we look at our drop down list in ML Scion. Sorry. You'll see there in your selection drop down here. You see that's one I just put in there, test. So that money laund program or money law, if you put it in there, this knows to pick it up in your selections. So you'll only see what the selections are set up with the program, money laundering, and then your description that you put in, which I put in test, is showing up there. So yeah, again, you can set up your own risk codes, you know, so you don't have to go by. You can have low, you can have medium low, medium high, and then again you can go to high, or you could set very high. You know, I've seen some credit unions where 4 or 5 different risk codes, and then you assign your selection against that. So I would suggest that if you are going to do that, is then you teach your money laundering report to run, where you're updating the risk codes. So I know some credit unions that do this, would teach it to run then as part of an end of week job. So say on a Saturday evening, because the report can take a few hours to run, especially when you're updating. If you have it set, it takes longer if you have it set to update the risk codes, because it has to go through all the selections and find the criteria and see what tenants meet that criteria. So I would suggest if you are going to do it, or you can still run it manually, whenever you want to. You know, you might decide that the AML officer will do it once a month or once every 2 months, or you know, you can still run it manually, but just be mindful if you are running it manually, to try do it at a time when maybe the credit union's less busy or you're not open to the public, because it does take a few hours to run, whenever you run it for updating the risk codes, because there's a lot of work it has to do in the background. So yeah, so that's to say that's kind of hard. That's the money laundering report. And if you do decide to run it in run it with updating your risk codes, you will need to then get those selections defined. And again, you might only define the selections for low and medium, and you might leave high then. You might leave high then as one that you will manually do each time you see it on the report, and your money laundering officer will then change that over. You can also color code. So when the transaction, when it's changed, you can color code then the member's name in Scion, just so at the top of the screen. So you can do red text on yellow background, or you can decide here what you want to do, so that then that account stands out, depending on what risk code that they do have. So that's that's everything then on our money laundering report. I'll move on now to the last bit, and we'll take a look at the just a refresher on AML 5, which came in there at the end of December. So I'm just going to go through the new programs from the AML 5 updates, and go through them and show you guys how they work, how you can do any changes to them if you need to. So the first one then I'm going to take a look at here is restriction type maintenance. So a restriction, this is to allow you to add a restriction onto a member's account. So the short code for that is RSTY main. And everything I'm going through here in the notes is will be sent out to you. You guys should have the notes, but I know that Rebecca will be sending them out again after today's call. So the first one is your restriction type maintenance. So this is where it lets you set up new restriction types. So in here, by default, you've got two restriction types. You've got court order and attachment order. So they're the two restrictions that you can put onto an account. So if you do get notification through from an outside body to say that they're wanting to put a freeze and a restriction on this tenant's account, this is where you set these up. So at the minute, I'm only aware of these two, court order and attachment, but you guys will probably know better on what ones need to be in there. So this is the screen that you set them up in. So you can just go in and set a new one up in here. So you're basically creating a code. So try keep your code to within 6 characters. Then enter your description in, your savings group, and then your access type can go in there too. Unpaid. And you can also see there, guys. You can see that access type. I'll show you a bit more about that in a sec. That's for if you want to be able to generate any, if you want to generate tasks, if a restriction order's been put on an account, you can go by that access type. So that's where you set your restrictions up, and then to add a restriction onto an account, you apply that then in the program called TABRA main. So tenant balance restriction. So if we just select an account here, and I go 7. So this one I put on earlier. So I'll just select another account there. 1 sec. So if I go down here into my restrictions, that's a deceased account. So I put it down here then. So you'll see I put in my court order, the date that's due to start, and the restricted amount. And once you put in the restricted amount, then the balances that tenant holds will then come up below, and then you can decide which balance you want to put it in. So the tenant might have multiple accounts. They might have a joint account and a single account. So you decide then where you're putting that restriction. So normally you'd probably only have the one share balance, but if the tenant did have 2 share balances, or they had a deposit account or an additional savings account, you could break that down and you could say, oh, well, we'll freeze 500 or 400 against the shares and 100 against savings or whatever. You can break that down. So that's in your tenant restriction program. And then what would happen is if that restriction was put on to the tenant's account, if the tenant came into the counter and they tried to withdraw that money out, they would get a message to say that that money is not available to be withdrawn out. And it would stop the thing. So the restrictions in place attempts all the balances. The balances can't fall below the restrictions. So that includes direct debits, CTs, internal transfers, standing orders, bill payments, and then also to any credit unions that offer the current account tolerance. The restriction will also stop the member then using that €100 tolerance on the account. You can also then run a report on all your tenant restrictions. So there's a report there called TABAREP. Oh, sorry, TABR. And you can run your report then, and it will list out all the accounts that have a restriction on it. Let's see if we can get it to display here. And I'll show you here then what date's on them. So at any one time you can see what balance it's under, what the restriction type is, whether it's attachment order, court order, or whether it's one you set up, a new one, and then a limit on it, the low limit, but the account can't go on, the tenant's savings can't go under. So next then with the AML5, then there were some changes around the around then credits and debits from high risk countries coming into the system. So so credits and debits that come in from or paid out to high risk AML countries will now go into unpaid maintenance whenever they're due to be sent or received. So they'll sit in unpaid maintenance for 7 days before they're returned back to where the originator. So you'll see in unpaid maintenance, you'll see this unpaid reason here in the drop down. So in here you'll see that it's showing for you see your credit, so there'll be a credit AML and there'll be a debit AML, and you'll be able to see all the transactions in here that are set to be returned. There's no data in this system, so so credits will have an unpaid reason code of AMLC, and debits then will have an unpaid reason code of AMLD. So so your AMLC and AMLD unpaid reason codes are maintained in, which you guys are probably aware of, the program unpaid reason maintenance. And they have a default number of days in there to return. So I'll just open that up on another session. So you just basically find your reason code here. I can find it. So AMLC, and you'll see their days to return is set to 7. So that's allowing 7 days for a decision to be made on them. If no decision is made in that time, they will simply just return as unpaid after 7 days. So a bit like when you see EFTs coming in where account closed or account deceased, you see them in unpaid maintenance as set to return after 3 days, so you can decide then how long you have. But if it's not done within the 7 days, or if you change that the 3 days, that's completely fine. But just be aware that that's only giving you 3 days to check that, to see if that's going to see if you're actually going to allow that in, because it might be that you're going to allow that payment in even though it's coming from a high risk country. So you'll see then that in here, and you can check the number of days. So once those transactions, once you've checked those settings, then or if you have decided that you are going to let the transaction go through, you should be able to. I'm just going to see under the More tab. It's taking a sec to load here, but I just want to show you where you can see the country where the origin of the payment is. Yeah, so if you look in here under the More tab, you'll see then. So if you see a transaction in there that's due to return because if it's been flagged as a high risk country, you can go in and you can see there. So this one, for example, is saying it's coming from France. Or that's where it came from. Although this transaction is not flagged to return, but you will see it in there, so you can decide then whether you want to send it back or not. If you decide that you're not going, you don't want to send the payment back, or you want to keep the payment, what you can do then is you can override that. So basically, you can force the payment through then. So there's none here that are eligible. So let's see if I can get one. Yeah, there's none that are eligible to go back there on this test system, but this one here, this override. So you can click on the override button, and then you can give a reason of why you're overriding it, or and just click on OK. So just do that, and that transaction. Not sure why it's not, but yeah, once you click OK, that transaction to then post through, and the transaction won't be sitting there with an unpaid reason code on it. So that's the override button down in the corner there. So the last thing then is that for you to be aware of, or to maintain, is your high risk countries. So the list of high risk countries is automatically maintained via Wellington Shared Services, and this list is updated regularly. However, should the credit union decide or determine that they want to increase or decrease the risk rating of a country, or overwrite the value for that country from shared services, this can be done in Scion by themselves. So if we take a look in COU main, so we can see we've got countries overridden and countries. So in here, on your system, you would see in country maintenance in countries, you would see all the country codes. And I think on the presentation we had sent out back in September, or sorry, back in December, we included a link of where you guys can look at this code yourself, or sorry, this list on the website. So it'll give you the risk rating, but you might decide that that risk rating is too low or too high. So like 1 being the highest risk, 5 being the lowest risk. So you might decide that you want to override that. So if I could see that Canada was maybe at number 1, and I decided that I wanted to change that to a number 5 to say it's low risk, I could override that in here. So I could select Canada, give that a risk rating of 1, and it'll also show then it'll show the original risk rating that has been sent down from shared services in the over here as your optional. And then you can just override them in that screen. So that's your country's maintenance screen. So it is. Just one of the last things then I want to show you is just some credit unions might find it useful, is the verification types in Scion. So it's a program called VETY main, and you can see in here whether it's active or not. So I'm just going to take a look at some things here, the likes of bad PPSN or bad ID, so ID out of date. You can affix by going in and switching this to active. You can put this message on the end of the member's name, so it appears up in account inquiry or counter program to alert your tellers. Or you can set up a new message code in STME main, and then you could have that pop up on the counter program whenever a bad ID is on a member's account. The same for no PPSN, unverified address. Just there's a lot of different ones in there, and some new ones have been added. So you probably notice that whenever you go into some accounts, it comes up to say that the consents on the account have expired, and you'll see there that this is the message. So if I take a look at in there, I should see that CO consents expired. So you guys are probably seeing this when you're going into accounts to say that the accounts have expired on the account. So please, the consents, please update them. So now you can set up your own message codes and then link them back to that VTY main. This means they'll pop up on the screen to alert the teller that the ID's out of date, or there's no PPSN on the account, or there's post returned on it. Just different things like that. Some credit unions have them, so they do coming up. I just kind of want to show you that's how they're set up in there. You're just linking a message code, and then that pops up in the counter. For the same, whether if there's a money laundering risk on an account, some of you guys might see that when that pops up, it tells the teller there's a money laundering alert on the account. Different things like that. So that kind of brings me to everything I wanted to show you guys. So we've got some time left here at the end. Then, if anyone has any questions that I can hopefully answer for you, please pop into the mic or unmute your mic, or Rebecca might have some there from the chat.
Yeah, I'll start, John, and as I say, you can keep the questions coming. Now, you might have covered some of these as we went on, but we'll just read them out anyway. Julie asks, is the detail captured in the CU Insight report also? That was at the start, so when you were doing the
So yeah. So at the minute, Julie, no. Do you mean for the money, the source of funds capture? I think you mean there. At the minute, no. It's not captured into CU Insight, but it hopefully is something that we will enhance to get that data over into CU Insight.
Okay, thank you. And Julie also asks, is there an AML instruction manual that includes all of this?
Yeah, so there's two manuals. There's the AML 5 and then there's the AML user notes. So I'm going to give those both to Rebecca to send out along with this the recording of the session. And in the AML notes too, usually you'll find that there might be other stuff in there that I didn't cover today. I only picked a few things from that. But that document, it's around 45 pages long, so there could be stuff in there that you might find useful too.
Thanks, John. Helen asked earlier in the session, will you be covering how to set up the risk code criteria? You may have done that, I'm not sure.
So we did, yes. So Helen, we did look at the risk code criteria there. When we talk about every credit union is different, they're going to want different selections. So we can't just do one, we can't show one selection. And then also when we start looking at selections in the system, they're very powerful, but they're also very complicated. So that's why I'm saying if that is something that you want to reach out, and it probably will be the case that it probably will be chargeable work, but we will work with you to get your selection criteria right, and then we can set that up on the system for you. You could spend 2 days looking at selections. They're very powerful, but they are complicated, and it's one of those parts of the system that will probably, unless you know the system really well and you know how to use selections, it's just one of those things that we'll always probably have to assist you with, especially for the AML stuff, because that's something that you want to get right.
Okay, thanks, John.
Thanks, John. John asks, can we have a program to change tenant risk codes based on a PIC file of account numbers?
Is that who asked that?
John Fee.
John, yeah. Yeah, John, I think that's been brought in, that's been mentioned quite a few times before. With me one sec.
Do you want me to come back to that question, John? Or
Yeah, come back to that. I'm not sure. It definitely is something I see would be an advantage, John. I'm near sure that it has been raised through as a change request, but I'll actually double check that, John, and I'll come back to you on that. But because I know that is something that credit unions do, maybe sometimes do all their AML stuff off system. You know, they look at the accounts and then they decide, well, these are the 500 accounts we want to set as high, and then they pop those into a pick file. So yeah, I definitely there's something rings a bell with it, but I don't know whether any work has been done on it yet, but we'll take a look.
no worries, John. We'll get back to you offline about that one then. Kevin asks, can you show an example of that color code function? You may already have. I'm not sure.
The color code, yeah. So basically, we'll try to find one here. I'll just show you what color coding in Scion is. So it would color code. I just look up an account. Yeah, so you'll see up here the name is color coded. Now that's not necessarily down to AML, but that's where the color code will show at the top. And you'll notice there too that you'll see that those were all the verification types that I was showing. So ID expired, bad ID, no PPSN. So that's where it would show on the name. If you did set those up rather than a pop-up message coming up. But yeah, that's where the color code would show, and that would show throughout the system. In as you see there, when I was looking the tenant up, I could see the color code. It was showing the counter program, account inquiry, loan maintenance, all those sorts of programs.
Thanks, John. Declan asks, is the unpaid maintenance program set up and operational for all credit unions at this point in time, or does it require configuration?
No, that should be set up and should be that was done as part of the AML 5, I believe, in back in December.
Okay, thank you. John asks, can the verification type maintenance program be used to flag related parties?
It can, John. Yep. Oh, to flag related parties.
Yeah.
So you mean ones that I know if you're an officer. I think it can because I've seen that before. Yeah, related persons. Yeah, because I have seen that coming up on some sites.
Okay.
And it says this account has related parties.
Great, thank you. Mark asks, he says, hi John, the initial counter program for the source of funds box, how is this enabled? We currently use a printed form and note on the transaction, which we would like to change.
So again, Mark, I went over it in the video there. So it's really the software is there. So it's really just, if you look back on the video when Rebecca sends it out, it is just making sure the workflow is turned on and then adding those workflows into the counter program. Is that you will be able to follow it from the video when Rebecca sends it out.
Okay, thanks, John. Aldo asks, can a second source of funds amount be set up for minor accounts?
No.
Sorry,
not
be set
minor,
to minor
no.
accounts. Okay, and Kevin just says thanks for showing the color codes. He saw one with light red and white text as well when you were searching there.
All right.
And Mark just says thanks for answering his question. So is there any more questions? Feel free to pop them into the chat or unmute your microphone and ask. Just give it a few seconds. No, I think that's us. I'll send out really shortly the recording of the session today along with the AML user guide, so you can have that. And thanks everyone for joining. You'll get an invite next week for our next workshop, which will be compliance in Scion, taking place on the 2nd of September. So keep an eye out in your inbox for that as well. And thanks for joining. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, John, as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.